Let's kick things off. He is literally one of history's most polarizing figures. A man whose name is recognized in every corner of the globe, yet whose actual life is shrouded in this crazy mix of folklore, absolute terror, and some surprisingly brilliant innovations. Today, we're taking an impartial dive into our source material for this explainer on Genghis Khan, the myth, the brutality, and the legacy.
Right off the bat, let's tackle a huge historical misconception head-on. Was Genghis Khan actually a Muslim leader? Now you might be thinking, wait, what? But in several regions of the world, this is a surprisingly widespread belief. It's an incredibly persistent myth that completely colors how people view his conquest today. But what do the actual historical records tell us?
Well, the historical reality is pretty much a total 180 from the myth. Genghis Khan was definitely not a Muslim. Our sources clearly show he was a devout follower of Tengrism, which is a completely different belief system. And far from being a protector of the Islamic faith, his campaigns across Central Asia and the Middle East actually decimated massive Muslim populations. It's a really striking example of how popular memory can sometimes just completely rewrite history.
Part 1. The Rise of Temujin, from exile to universal ruler. To really understand how this guy amassed enough power to impact millions of lives, we gotta strip away the whole Khan title and look at his childhood. Born in 1162 as Temujin, legend says he came into the world holding a blood clot in his tiny fist. Talk about a harsh omen for a harsh life, right? And things got brutal fast. When he was just 9 years old, his father, a tribal chief, was poisoned. Temujin's family was instantly cast out into poverty, just left to survive in the freezing Mongolian wilderness. At 16, he marries Borte, which kicks off this intense period of forging alliances. Through sheer brilliance, ruthless survival instincts, and some serious political maneuvering, he gradually unified the warring Mongol tribes. By 1206, against all odds, he achieved the unthinkable and was crowned a Genghis Khan, the universal ruler.
Moving right along to Part 2, the expanding empire, conquering Eurasia.
Once those tribes were united, it catalyzed an explosive outward expansion that literally redrew the map of the world. The sheer geographic scale of his conquests is staggering. We are talking about expanding from China, the Koreas, Afghanistan and Iran over in the east, and pushing deep into modern-day Russia, Georgia, Poland, and Armenia in the west. That is a continuous land empire that ultimately spanned 12 million square miles. Stretching from the Pacific Ocean right to the edges of Eastern Europe, it's an administrative and military feat that remains pretty much unmatched in human history.
Which brings us to Part 3, the unprecedented death toll, the brutality of conquest.
Because the speed of the Mongol war machine was matched only by its total devastation. 40 million, according to the historical data in our sources, that is the estimated global death toll directly attributed to the Mongol conquests. Entire cities were literally leveled to the ground. Rich agricultural lands were turned back into grazing pastures for their horses, and populations that dared to resist were entirely wiped out.
Let's actually contextualize what 40 million meant back then. That figure represents roughly 11% of the entire global population. Let that sink in for a second. More than 1 in 10 human beings alive on Earth perished during these campaigns. It's a level of demographic destruction that totally altered the course of human history. And actually, it even temporarily caused global temperatures to drop because of the massive depopulation of farmlands.
And our source material details some truly harrowing specifics of this terror. Take the city of Nishapur alone. An estimated 1.7 million people were systematically killed there, and to instill absolute psychological terror, just to ensure no one would ever dare rise against them again, the Mongol forces built literal pyramids out of the severed heads of the victims. Just horrific stuff. But for them, it was a calculated, ruthless, and terrifyingly effective military strategy.
Which makes Part 4 so fascinating: administration and tolerance, the paradoxical ruler.
How do we explain the fact that the architect of such chaotic destruction also built a strictly regulated and honestly super progressive society? The historical record completely shatters the idea of the Mongols as just mindless barbarians. Genghis Khan instituted the Yam system, which was basically a medieval pony express that functioned like a modern postal service, letting communication fly incredibly fast across his massive empire. He also provided vital military protection for merchants traveling the Silk Road, effectively rebooting global trade. He mandated complete religious freedom for all his conquered subjects, and he promoted his generals strictly on merit and loyalty, not because of their aristocratic birth. He built a system designed to run like a well-oiled machine.
And this illustrates a totally bizarre paradox between his personal faith and his public policy.
Genghis Khan practiced Tengrism, a religion centered on shamanism and the worship of the sky god Tengri. He personally believed that Tengri had divinely chosen him to conquer and rule the entire world. Yet, despite this massive religious conviction, he enacted absolute religious tolerance. He allowed Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, whoever, to practice their faiths freely because he realized that granting religious freedom was a remarkably cheap and effective way to prevent rebellions. Pure pragmatism.
Finally, Part 5, the final mystery, death and enduring legacy.
Because even in death, Genghis Khan managed to leave behind a profound puzzle. The extreme lengths they went to keep his 1227 burial site a secret are straight out of a dark thriller. After his loyal soldiers secretly buried him in an unmarked location, that burial escort was then executed by another group of soldiers. Then, just to ensure absolute silence, those executioners were themselves killed. Because of this totally ruthless cover-up, the grave of the man who ruled the largest contiguous empire in history has never been found. It's a complete mystery.
Fast forward to the modern era, and the assessment of his impact is, well, it's highly complex. In 1995, the Washington Post actually named him the Man of the Millennium. Despite the profound bloodshed, historians recognize that his conquests ultimately forced the East and the West to connect, driving a massive exchange of technology, culture, and goods that basically laid the groundwork for our modern interconnected world. But perhaps his most mind-blowing legacy is purely physical. 16 million men. Geneticists have discovered that roughly 16 million men alive today share an identical Y chromosome DNA lineage that points straight back to one single prolific ancestor living in Mongolia around 1,000 years ago, which is widely believed to be Genghis Khan himself. Talk about a biological footprint of unparalleled scale.
Which leaves us with this final massive question. How do we actually reconcile the architect of such unprecedented destruction with the pioneer of global connectivity? The guy extinguished roughly 11% of humanity, yet he established global postal systems, safeguarded international trade, and mandated religious tolerance. It is absolutely one of history's greatest paradoxes, and